welcome everybody to episode 56 and season 5, beginning of season 5 of the Unchained Vodcast. As usual, we have our usual crew of Kriss, Brand, and myself here to talk about news, talk about the game, and make up stuff about Camelot Unchained.
Mainly makeup stuff.
Mainly that.
Increasingly. Beta 1 is out, as probably everyone in chat knows at present. But for anyone watching on YouTube that may not know, Beta 1 has finally occurred. It has come out, sort of. at least in name.
It has. It has, yeah.
In name, it has come out. Whether or not people want to debate whether or not it's a beta, they do.
Yeah.
But as CSE is defining it, and has always defined it, Beta 1 is now out. People are getting in regularly to test during weekdays, mainly alpha testing during weekends. Beta 1 testers getting in pretty regularly. We do not yet have a regular schedule for the Beta 1 testing, which...
We actually had more regular testing before Beta 1 started than
it's been pretty regular. It's been like every Saturday so far.
Yeah.
It's just they don't tell us till the day beforehand, which makes it hard to turn out.
Yeah.
Makes it hard for me to go, everyone in my guild, let's go test when it's the day before. And I'm like, come on, you guys got stuff to do. I don't feel right going like, it's tomorrow, you better be there.
And then an hour into getting to work, I get that Discord notification. Water prep is up for testing. It's like, really?
Yeah. Lots of during the week testing, I'll say that.
Yes.
They're definitely hammering out some stuff and working on things. So it's good to see. Definitely progress has been made.
Yes.
It's out. We can't really say much about it except that it's out, and it's awesome that it's out. So, having some fun doing that. But today, we're going to talk about story. We're going to have story time. We wanted to do a Beta 1 episode,
favorite
but
subject.
I know, right?
Roleplay, Sakrak's favorite subject.
Not roleplay, story and lore.
Yeah. He already said roleplay. So.
He was already fussing at me in Discord. We did want to do a Beta 1 episode, but nothing new really came out with Beta 1 that isn't under NDA. So
yeah.
But if people have questions, if you have Beta 1 questions and stuff, feel free to post them in chat and as a comment to the video, and we'll reply to them if we can. So let's get started. First thing I wanted to say was to start off with an interesting query. PvP and RvR based MMOs. Which ones have come out that actually did a decent job? Which ones that were focused on PvP and RvR actually did a decent job at conveying story?
I don't have an answer for that because I haven't played.
I do have
Tri-Realm.
Are we talking purely PvP?
I don't think there's that many MMOs that are purely PvP. So I would say that's the main focus, or what they mainly advertise themselves as. And to give y'all a moment to think, because I always spring these questions on you kind of last minute without any preparation. I have two that I listed, which is Elder Scrolls Online. They did advertise themselves as a PvP MMO. Whether or not they ended up focusing on that was debatable. And Guild Wars 1. I would say both of those did a pretty good job with story. The list is pretty short.
I mean,
Ultima Online. Ultima Online had a... not that I played it.
Online, so.
Not that I played it, but from people who played it, they had a pretty good storyline. They had even GM roleplay events, I believe, within the story. GMs playing main characters in the game. So apparently these people loved the story.
Yeah, I thought about Star Wars: The Old Republic. The only reason I didn't mention it is because I didn't feel like that game was really. I felt like that game was really ultimately a theme park game. It did have PvP in it. I never felt like they really emphasized PvP to any significant degree. I mean, honestly, they couldn't even do open world PvP halfway reasonably.
But there was at least an effort to tie some flavor story into the each battleground, as well as Ilum.
Yeah,
when they first tried to make Ilum.
Warhammer, the lore, we've mentioned it before, but their whole, I always forget what it's called, but the lore compendium and everything that they had was awesome for that. I have to do my thumbs up closer because I just realized I'm super off camera when I do that. But it was awesome. Just is basically a huge wiki of RP stuff and lore that they had for the game. And that was one thing I wanted to follow that up with is how did they do it? How did these games get that RP out? And I think for both my examples, TISO and Guild Wars 1, they kind of cheated because they had single player, they had storyline and PvE questing.
Yes.
Guild Wars basically just put the storyline PvE segment mostly before the PvP, and then you got to in-game PvP at the end.
Yeah.
And then TISO, you had single player storylines that you could go throughout the game.
Yeah.
And they did tie expansions and stuff.
And they had the whole lore
story,
of the game, yeah. All the games before that.
If you look at games that are strictly player versus player, as far as the terminology of what it means to be player versus player, not just MMOs, but games like Overwatch, Team Fortress 2 when that was out, all the current MOBA games, that's player versus player. They build a very flavorful lore for the characters, for the maps, and that's it.
Yeah,
there's no story to it. So the answer to your question is a game that has PvE elements can therefore tie in the story, but without it, it's kind of hard.
Purely PvP game has no need basically for a story.
I disagree.
Well, marketing wise, they don't need it. It doesn't. It's not the main draw of the game for the players, except the role players, of course. But
and I would say that depends on who you're trying to attract to the game.
Yeah, of course. If you're trying to cater to role players, but the problem is role players are not always the main target for PvP games.
Not always.
No, because at least from my experience, role players are more drawn to PvE games where they can actually role play and not have somebody come and kill them as they sit around in the tavern and do their role play, which is what a lot of role players do. But there are still people who want to role play and PvP like we want to do in CU.
Well, and
because it adds flavor.
And I would actually say that our own community, Legend Gaming, shows that there are a large amount of people who may not even be role players. I mean, we have a fair number of role players, but even people who aren't role players but are PvPers, many of them do still enjoy having that lore and that story flair about their characters and their races and their realm, especially because I think the story really can help to contribute to realm pride and things like that. Because when you review it and you go like, "Oh, those freaking gnomes have wronged us in the past," for some people that does something for them, and so they get into it. But you know, we've had tradition of usually having story plots and things with our guilds, and generally of attracting people who do enjoy that. So it is something for even people that never joined like RP events we might have. They still like kind of knowing what goes on in some of them and stuff because they go like, it's immersive for them a little bit, even if they're like, I ain't got time to RP. I can't be bothering with that. But I am mighty Sith Knight and I destroy all the Jedi because I hate them. Ha 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 ha. Star Wars Galaxy, I did play a teensy bit of. Unfortunately, not a lot of, but it's probably a good example of things. But unfortunately, they can work. I think it is easier sometimes to work out some of that when you have the open world sandbox design because there's different ways you can go about some of those, and you can still have quests and things. The Tome of Knowledge is what I was referring to. Sacrix mentioned that for me, so thank you. Obviously, they can do something like that here. I mean, Mark Jacobs did it before, so I'd be surprised if we don't have something at least similar to it in some capacity.
Well, we talked about what we'd like the library in the main cities to gather all the lore. But yeah, for me, RvR, especially in CU, I like that the story, and as you said for Star Wars, it was the same. The story is kind of the excuse for people to say, "I don't like you guys,
Yeah.
and I want to go bash your head." It's just another reason to go and bash somebody's head, basically.
So one thing I did want to go to is, there's a few PvP and RvR MMOs that have done some things that kind of work with story.
Yeah,
But looking at the wider range of MMOs, what sort of things have they done? How have they really worked at conveying the story elements throughout their games? I mean, aside from obviously they put things on the website, they have videos and cutscenes.
hmm
It's usually through quests or through like the lore book or the tome of knowledge, is
yeah,
that what
the
you call
terms
it?
of knowledge.
Things like that that
Books.
give access to books
Yeah, books.
in any Elder Scrolls game. That's
You
awesome.
have the scrolls.
So many books you can open.
But for RVR games or PvP games in general, or even not a full PvP game, but just the PvP aspect of a much wider game like Star Wars, the Old Republic, or TISO, is in-game events and funneling people through not necessarily quests, but notifications, NPC chats, and things like that to drive a story
And
funnel to
not
get
just
people
that,
engaging.
I get back to that example because I had the chance of living through it during the end of the beta in Elder Scrolls Online. There was a huge battle in Chalmon Fort in the PvP area that the players dubbed the Chalamo because there was not a lot of Ebonheart Pact players defending a keep against a lot of other players, and the devs made it into the players made it kind of into a role play event, but the devs integrated that into the game lore, and in the Chalman keep you have now a tome telling you about the Chalamo and this battle that happened in a lore way. So not just the players doing that, but they actually turned that into a battle story, basically.
Things like that.
Yeah, player event. The devs, if they were talking a long time ago. I don't know if it's even still in the books about the devs or at least GMs joining into the lore and making the lore live into the game, which is for me one of the main way of actually making your lore live and build, and not just being something that is on stuck on the website or on books that only the role players are gonna go read.
Yeah.
Right.
Sacrix asked a really good question. I'm going to hold off to the end of this current conversation. But, I mean, you pretty much have the few standard examples y'all have given. Quests are obviously like the main vehicle. I would actually say, I think when it comes to theme park MMOs, quests and cutscenes are probably the two main vehicles. Because if you think about it, a lot of them don't actually put things on websites that much because they can put it in game. Like World of Warcraft, how many lore pages do they actually put up themselves for different things? Now, other people compile things into wikis and all sorts of things
Yes,
for
sure.
them, but how many things does Blizzard actually put on their website lore-wise? I mean, hell, we can't even get the age ranges for some of the races. The game's been out for ages. They still won't confirm some of that crap. You can go to some of the tabletop books and get some of these things. Not that I've had to dig for any of this crap, but anyway, because I have. But anyway, so they leave a lot of things just ambiguous, but they really push the story through quests and through cutscenes. I
Yes.
think is their primary methods. And then of course you have some of these tomes and things. Elder Scrolls is really big on the books. You find them on the shelves.
Yeah.
You open it, you can find all kinds of stuff, which I think is great. NPC encounters. Someone mentioned this earlier, liking to encounter unique NPCs. I think that's something that can be used and really push the story. There is a problem, of course, with regards to CU and a lot of these things. We don't expect there to be tons of NPCs, especially not
and not
unique
very
ones.
interaction heavy NPCs anyway.
Exactly. We don't really expect there to be a lot of PvE quests,
Quest
if
queues,
any.
no.
So that definitely adds to the challenge of how they can implement some of these things. Now, for that question that Sacrix asked that I thought was interesting, I hadn't thought about intro videos. Obviously, that's a way to push some story. World of Warcraft does that. They have their intro videos, and every couple of expansions, they'll change those for some of the races and things as circumstances change for them. He asked what sort of intro video we would want to see for Arthurian, since we play Arthurian, or are going
Intro
to.
video.
Like on a per race or per class type
I
thing,
guess
or
that's
just
depending on what you would
realm?
like to see. I mean, that's what he's asking.
Yeah.
What would you like to see? Oh, you didn't mean intros? Okay, then maybe I misread your question.
Go with it.
Yeah, y'all just keep going with it. What type of lore intros do you want? Okay, he didn't mean video, so I guess just lore intro. But I'm going with videos because I think that would be interesting. So
Well, the main one would be for me a more generic one for all the realms, and would be a cutscene of the breaking of the realm. The main event, basically, that broke the world of CU into the islands we know. Would be
something that explains the current status of why we
Yes.
are now doing what we're doing.
I was actually thinking
previously on CU.
I was actually thinking what would be interesting for me would be a separate intro video for each realm on the fracturing of Camelot and their previous alliances and everything, and basically one from each perspective. The perspective of the TDD, what they say happened. Then from the Vikings, what they say happened, so on and so forth. So we get three slightly different perspectives on history.
And why we hate each other.
Exactly. It just establishes that foundation. This is why we're pissed at each other. And
it's why it's their fault the world broke.
Maybe something that ties into scenario tutorials. Because usually a tutorial type thing, which we know scenarios are going to be initially used for, ideally only used for that.
Yes.
Tying into that and leading up to playing through the scenario as a tutorial, and like most games as an optional skip, if you don't want to do it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I could say for Sacrix follow-up, what would you want to? Would you want to come up with your own story, or have Max build it up to the point where you then follow the lore by RPing? I would say I would rather have established lore that exists in game and says this is what happened, or this is what your realm is saying happened. Because one, RPers can build off of that, and to a certain extent, RPers can choose to ignore that. Depending on what it is, unless something is hammered in concrete detail and says this definitely happened, we can sometimes go, there's ambiguity there, so I'm going to say maybe it happened differently.
And if the lore is generic enough, you can kind of divert from it.
But if there's no official
non-canon, basically.
But if there's no official lore that exists, it's really hard to build up your own RP, because then everyone's working with no common frame of reference, and then that's a problem.
And for me, one of the draws also for roleplay in general is that in most PvE games, you're the hero, you're the chosen one.
Everyone is the chosen
one. But then you have too many chosen ones.
It's so irritating.
At least in a PvP game like CU, you can be a grunt. You can be something that is not a realm changer. You're not the savior of the world. You can be just a mercenary that is in it for the money and doesn't look farther than the next paycheck to go drink at the tavern or things like that.
Absolutely. I was just looking to see who else is hanging out with us. So, what I have now is kind of an open question I wanted to put out there. It's not really a question.
Mhm.
I just wanted to open up the floor for specifically what ideas we have, what methods CSE can use for imparting different parts of the game's lore and the story into the world to make it more immersive. Besides just stacking tons of stories on their website, which is great.
Yeah.
I like having them there, but
But
most people
are
aren't
not
going to
gonna go
read
read
them.
it.
And I have one I want to pitch because I'm already talking
Sure.
and I can just keep talking. Because this was actually one I thought of today while I was sitting here trying to brainstorm this, and I love the idea of it. And that is flavor text on items. You know how when you play Magic the Gathering and you whip out the card and they have the little flavor
bottom of the
text on the
card.
bottom,
Yeah.
of the card that
Yeah.
just sometimes is irrelevant, but sometimes really explains something important in the story somewhere. The thought of having those on different things and items and stuff throughout the world would actually be, I think, pretty easy to do and write. And they could put it on all kinds of stuff, like, for instance, minerals you gather from mining, or from gathering, or from for craft stuff you get for crafting. Some of that, not necessarily all of it, because who needs lore on a piece of dirt? But
Yeah.
on some of those things, there could be like pre-scripted just flavor text that appears at the bottom of the description of what that item is, and goes, this is rock from the blah 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 region, which, by the way, so on and so forth, etc. is like a one-line thing that just releases
Yeah.
a tidbit or a hint about something, or references some bit of lore.
Like for the places of power and things
Exactly,
like that.
and there's a few things I thought of they could attach these to. One is just crafting components and items. Maybe if a sword is made out of a rare material, there might be a little bit of flavor text talking about that material. Who first created that material? Oh, the alchemist blah 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 was the first to invent this type of
Yeah.
alloy, and it's just a little bit of
That's
something nice.
that's not even story. That's, for me, that's super important, but that's
Yeah,
another
yeah.
discussion. It's
I'm
crafting recognition.
I'm referring to maybe crafting materials that aren't so rare that players invented them.
Yes, but at the same time, that
Yeah.
ties into the subject, which is, for me, something that also rewards player investment, which is integrating the players, especially the prominent one. Somebody who discovers a really powerful alloy, crafts the first most powerful, like the first Excalibur, things like that. Those kind of players, integrating them into the lore. I think that's for me pretty important for player involvement, player motivation.
Yeah.
In CU, contrary to a PvE game where you can say, we're the first in the world to have down that boss, we're the first in the world to have that or that. In a PvP game, purely PvP game, you can't really have your claim to fame like that. If you can get integrated into the lore, that's a pretty big one.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. As for the flavor text for just general items, the other thing are weapons and gear of certain types. As I mentioned, perhaps made by certain alloys or with certain effects. It might reference just semi-related things. And another one I thought of was spell components, because you already have that spell book, your tome of sorts, that have different spell components and things in there. So there could be references to little components of abilities, not necessarily spells, but abilities. It could also be a place where they sometimes insert flavor text that just references things. It's basically just like a sly way to make casual references to things in the lore that may or may not be explained more elsewhere, but just could add little interesting tidbits.
I've got one that isn't so much full story integration or immersive on the lore end, but more just immersive in general. And that is if they can find a way to integrate sort of live map updates through NPC dialogue, either via the king or through some sort of central map hub when players first log into the city and are trying to go out, where when they talk to the king, they might get flavor text of, hey, the Vikings just took over this place, and it's live reflecting of the current map control that they can then go, oh, we're going to go there. Or if an NPC is running down one of the roads from further along, he's shouting, through some already pre-made dialogue. You know,
Town
like the
crier.
Vikings took over this. Yeah, just to kind of funnel people towards a place
That would
without
be cool.
forcing it.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Just like a town crier that's all like, blah, 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 keep has just fallen to the Vikings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Without throwing up a huge like chat message that's, you know, world chat type of thing.
I would agree with, as Brother Love just mentioned, the game will have NPCs, and they certainly can have a certain like flavor text of their own of dialogue comments from NPCs. Whether it's happens naturally all the time, or maybe you even have to click on them if they don't want to do voiced lines for the NPCs. Then maybe you click on them, you get a text thing that pops up and goes, "Oh yes, I remember that time that warrior Kriss visited the such and such keep, and he took an arrow to the knee. It was a terrible sight to see. Terrible." But even not player-based things, but they could reference the things that have happened in more recent history, or maybe there's a bard that hangs around the city and sometimes sings old songs and things like that kind of naturally make the world seem a little bit more alive and realistic. That was one thing I did like about TISO, is I really liked how they took some of the creations of fans of Elder Scrolls and stuff. Like they had Maluka make some songs for their taverns and things, and actually put them in game. I thought that was that was really
pretty
good.
awesome.
So
yeah. And then you have what I talked about that they had in Ultima Online, and that I still to this day remember fondly from EverQuest, even if it was not a PvP game. It's GM's roleplay event. They don't have to play in EverQuest. They could play gods. In CU, they can just play characters from the lore. Then when they want to create a big battle, like a main event, maybe when two islands are about to join, and one of the factions, the one who's about to lose the island, one of their figurehead, one of their heroes, comes out to bolster the troops and try to retake that island before it actually is lost for the other realm.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point, because a lot of things when it comes down to the history and lore and everything, it's not just about history, but also about pushing the story forward. How do you evolve the game? And that's especially hard with an RvR game, because
PvP system.
What do you do to evolve the story forward? EVE Online tends to sometimes introduce new races or something a little bit. They can introduce some things, but they have trouble because it's based on the players. So they tend to focus on what the players have been doing, and then they push that forward.
Yeah.
But that's challenging with CU because they don't all exist in one universe and all one server like EVE does. It's not a completely shared experience. So having some ways that they can introduce story events and things to push new content. They can do videos with new expansions. That is one way. They can do cutscenes.
Yeah.
Is not really a cutscene, but a video for a new expansion came out, and they could push some story along that way. That was one thing I did want to ask about in relation to this is, are there any areas you think it would be appropriate for CU to use cutscenes?
Aside from the tutorial, for me, not really.
I have one, and that's if you captured Camelot.
Yeah,
I could see that.
That maybe.
True.
Maybe capturing
the game.
Maybe something short. If you capture the depths, there might be something that happens during the transition.
Crafting something super epic. You see your character camera kind of panning around it, and it's just like holding up its epic thing. Like, yeah.
Star Wars poster with the two hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Zelda, it just floats up and he's like, ba, 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 ba.
Which is even more appropriate with the Vox.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'd say no, because PvP has to be very fluid.
Yeah, certainly not in the middle of battle.
No distractions.
And that's the thing.
That'd be harder to control in an open world targetable environment where battle is constantly going on.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Like, if something specific is achieved, like if there were some sort of PvP quest and it was succeeded on, I could maybe see something happening, especially if the goal is to clear the area and go, okay, the event is over, battle concluded, go away. You've re-merged Camelot and claimed it for your realm. That I'm assuming, especially since keeps take a while to capture, at some point it would be okay. Y'all can't recapture this right now. They've got it. So,
well, slightly off topic. If you capture Camelot, imagine the dragons come.
Maybe.
And that's when they break the world again.
Maybe they're just real pissed off about Camelot. They really don't like it.
Yeah.
There was something I had quest wise. This is something that's been mentioned by Mark Jacobs before in relation to the depths, but it has not been mentioned in a long, long time. And that is
the cameras.
Well, that too, but in the depths, finding fragments of the past, finding bits of lore and references to what happened in the past. That's actually part of our guild lore, is that we're interested in finding out what originally happened. Mostly because we can seize that power for ourselves, but still,
mainly that.
But what it occurred to me is, I started thinking about, I'm like, how does that even work? How do you find things in the depths? I'm like, they could just put things there that you stumble upon, but that's really lame. And so what I really thought about is something more akin to the secret world, where perhaps it's not just taking the depths and then you find these things, but perhaps there are things truly hidden. And there are secrets and hints that exist in the world, and it's like a faction-wide mini-game to find these little fragments. That's going to take time. It's not going to be something that you just take it over and you walk in there and go, let's go get it, guys. But somebody's got to be looking for it. And perhaps there's things like, in the main city, there might be a historian NPC who gives out bits of lore and things when you talk to him, but he might also drop hints. And because the depths is ever-changing, that means they could also release new ones over time. You could find something, and then at some point they could go, oh, look, we slipped a new little tidbit in there somewhere. All the realms now get to compete to find that thing that we put in there.
And you can make that an objective for PvP.
Obviously, it wouldn't be a sort of thing you'd want to do all the time, because the main objective for PvP is killing each other. But that could be something interesting that would add story and lore, and also mix things up in the PvP. Because, as you said, it becomes then even more of an objective to capture the depths, so that some of your people can go exploring and try to find these things.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be for everybody. You only have so many people that are interested in role play. Like Sakrix said, for us, role play is more of a flavor. You can do full roleplay events and where you're sitting in the tavern or in the inn and doing your roleplay, or you can actually make it a flavor of like the reason why you're fighting, and why you want to bash somebody's head. You just add that rather than saying, "Oh, I'm gonna kill this guild because they're morons or whatever." I'm just gonna go but that's because they're Vikings. All Vikings are morons anyway. So.
I mean, for the depths, at least in the stories that they've come up with, both Max and Mark together, the stories usually reflect some sort of adventure to reclaim very powerful artifacts or treasure. So they can implement that as some sort of PvP control point that NPCs are currently trying to dig up this thing, and you're vying for control over that, and whoever has control, their faction is the one currently digging it up, kind of situation. And then whoever digs it up gets a small PvP bonus as well as some lore tidbits.
And another event type thing that has come up occasionally in our stream is, of course, in-game holidays. I think they did mention at some point that if they do holiday events, they would like them to be based on the game's lore. And I think that is a way they can do some of the background lore and things in there. Is they could have in-game events that in-game, like holiday events and things that might reference things in the common world history. even if they make them conveniently take place during the time of real world holidays, like, oh, look, everyone's on Christmas break. Well, we just happen to have a winter festival that happens at the same time in commemoration of the time that the emissaries came and saved us from extinction. Yeah, could happen.
It makes sense that they do it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say in terms of RP, I prefer both. I do sometimes just want to sit in an inn and talk to people and talk out what we're going to do in RP and stuff. And sometimes just make up stories and we do stuff. But sometimes we literally want to go, okay, we're going to go out in the PvP and field and kill people. Let's make up a reason why we're doing it. And then we're going to just kind of talk to each other while we do it. And we have a roleplay reason for murdering them.
We usually see people who are not so involved in the RP aspect of it at least come up with some emotes that they've copy pasted, and as they're just killing things, which is all they care about, they'll paste emotes in and they're participating.
That's like that back in Star Wars: The Old Republic, for our guild, I was the RP officer and Brand was the PvP officer, and we got together during one of the world events they did and just said, all right, let's do an RP PvP thing, and we only actually had like, I think 6 or 7 RPers that were actually participating in it and actually role playing, but then we had like 20 to 30 non-RPers who were still role playing with us because when we were like walking, they would slash walk and just kind of walk up to enemies and stuff, and the rest of us would be like, "You need to evacuate this area because we said so, and the Empire is taking control of it." And they're like, "What? What are you guys talking about? We're not doing that." And then we're like, "Then we shall kill you." And then all the PvPers would run forward with us, and we murdered them all. But we gave you fair warning. You didn't leave. You die. Of course, we outnumbered them like 30 to like 10 to 1 too. But
there is that.
It was a world event. It was in an open PvP area, and they weren't defended, so sucks to be them. But that turned into a larger PvP event because they eventually got reinforcements and came back, and then it was like just open field battles for the next 2 hours.
But the basis for the battle was roleplay.
Yeah.
It still turns into PvP.
Yeah.
But at the core, the start of it is roleplay and the lore.
It was designed as a PvP funnel with story.
Yeah, and it is hard to roleplay when you're in the middle of killing people and being killed.
Yes,
it ends up turning into, I killed him, let me type one sentence real quick, and on to killing the next guy.
Because even getting to that point, they had like this quest chain you had to go through that unlocked some of the things in that PvP zone for you to do. So you kind of still had to go through the PvP setup of it, but it did funnel you there. And eventually, at least for the first 2 weeks, was pretty commonplace to see people fighting.
There were some comments in chat earlier I wanted to bring up for ideas. Sacrix mentioned the newsletter for putting out some story and lore things. And I do think that's actually a way they could potentially do it. I don't think they would want to do that every day, obviously. And I'm assuming by the newsletter, well, actually, I don't know. He might have meant the email newsletter, but I was assuming he meant like the daily updates, the things that we get.
A little flavor text.
Yeah, they could put in some flavor text and things in there that would just help.
Maybe a little lore update or something that happened in the realm.
Yeah, or it could even be, or they could occasionally do new lore and updates, but it could also be something where maybe it just automatically picks the little tidbits from a list of lore references and things they have and just auto-populates to the newsletter. That's a thing. I also, as you said, acknowledging things that happen in the game and players. We've mentioned before with the daily updates, that would be a good way for them to acknowledge certain battles that happened, spread awareness of the events of the game.
Yeah, it will say things like how TISO utilized the actual Elder Scrolls, which have huge lore background to them already, as objects that can be interacted with the players, as the whole purpose of their PvP system in Cyrodiil was obtaining the Elder Scrolls because they gave you bonuses and taking them back to your keeps. They can have updates in that kind of daily thing, like such and such realm or so and so player stole the item, whatever, from the Arthurians and was last seen, traveling this direction or something to try to push people to go retrieve it. And those become focal points for PvP. And I think with a PvP game, I always talk about funneling players into areas of contestment in order to spark PvP without forcing it. I think those are story ways that they can do that.
Yeah. What do you think about them putting out kind of the realm quests in terms of some sorts of like RP flair and stuff, like for instance saying this is a terrible example, but saying so and so forth from the Tuatha has insulted our king. We want to show them our ire for the next 24 hours and such. Because to a certain degree, I can go like that. That would be interesting. But at the other hand, what if the TDD is not the strongest realm on the server, and you're really trying to focus on the Vikings, and then you're like, oh, but now people are focusing on the Tuatha, and we don't really want them to do that.
Yeah, but that if it's not something automated, the devs can decide to target the realm that is actually dominating at that moment.
Conversely, you could use the same concept, take it down a step from being an automated kind of quest to a player writable bounty, and players through the bounties can write up their own RP. It's entirely up to the player at that point, but they can use a bounty as RP flavor for why they want someone to go out and kill that person.
Sackers did mention the bounty system earlier. I think it's a good way for players to kind of introduce some of their own pseudo lore, I guess, into the game. Not really necessarily official stuff, but to help make the game more realistic in a fashion and more immersive. Bandlero mentioned signs in different places. I'm a little bit wary of signage because too much of it is easily ignorable. But I do like the idea of certain things having like plaques, especially particularly notable things. Like maybe you find a place of power and it has some sort of a plaque to show that it was some place of historical significance or something.
Well, it could be
who knows what happened to it, but
ghost or something like that, more than a plague. But yeah,
possibly, yeah.
I want gravestones
like
permanently on my end only. On the client end, gravestones everywhere I've died in the game, so I can see every single place.
There'll be a lot of gravestones.
Nah, that would be annoying.
Yes.
Maybe the
that
last
sounds like that would be a good mod.
Maybe the last 2 or 3, but because eventually, if you play for years, you're not going to be able to stab anywhere you don't have a gravestone already.
All right, so we've covered quite a few different things and ways that they could possibly include some different story and history and lore into the game. I always like to end these off with a bit of a softball, just for general conversation. So, why is any of this important?
I think it just adds more to the game. It gives people not just immersion, but a sense of this being more than just I'm going to log on and hit some buttons and kill some fools. It just makes it seem like a world that isn't me behind a computer. And I think that is extremely helpful. Even games like Overwatch, those MOBA games, they have flavor. They have lore to the map. They don't matter as far as playing the game goes, but it's nice to know that it's there, and it makes you understand a bit more about what's going on, and it just helps.
And for me, it's because at the end of the day, it is still a game where you go play, you go kill the other side. The big difference is it's a persistent world. When you play in games like Overwatch, like Rainbow Six, like those games are short-term matches. The lore doesn't matter as much because you're in short bursts of action and you can just log off and it's not going to impact your gaming. In a game like CU, where it's a persistent world, having a sense of continuity, a sense of it being a world, a living world, gives you that something more that makes it different from the lobby based PvP games, basically.
Yeah, Ben Laro kind of echoed some of what y'all just said, and I agree with that. That it really does makes the game, helps make the game more immersive. And a lot of people talk about immersion in the game and think about, generally it's thought of it in terms of feeling in the game at the moment, but I think immersion also applies to how realistic the game feels in a persistent sense. Not just necessarily when you're playing the game right there and you're really into it, but how realistic it is overall, how much it seems like something that you can really invest yourself into. And especially when they're talking about things like realm pride, they really want people to feel realm pride.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's really hard to feel realm pride without lore in the game. I know that's not necessarily going to be the case for everybody, but like you take the case in point of World of Warcraft. When I look at some of some people get super invested, as we've seen recently with like the new content coming out in WoW. Some people are pissed. They are.
Yeah, I've seen
mostly
that.
At the devs,
I don't understand
mostly
it,
at the
but I've seen
devs
it.
because some of them seem really mad about some of the plot developments and things. But it generally, people are getting really riled up over it. They're invested. They're attached to it. And also when you're invested and attached to the game, you tend to stay and play the game longer. You tend to want to come back to it and
Yes.
keep doing it. If there's no lore or any styling to the game to really kind of grasp onto your heart and hold you in there, I think it's a little bit easier to let go and go on to other games.
And the funny thing is, you mentioned World of Warcraft. Half of the ones who are pissed off are not even role player, who most of the time don't give a shit about the lore.
Yeah, but they do care a little bit.
apparently, yes. I have no idea what the lore of the game is, because I've never played really for a long time.
And I think a lot of that has to do with they've been, over the last number of years, giving and feeding players story through cutscenes and these quests that they are now familiar with, regardless whether they want to be or not, familiar with the growing story. And it's continually growing. And subconsciously, they're liking some of it, disliking some of it, and hoping, without even thinking about it, that something's going to happen.
And that's one of the other reasons lore is extremely important. The sense of belonging, the sense of ownership. When you have a lore, when you feel that it's a world that is evolving, that is living, and not just a 5-minute match, 10-minute match, you tend to appropriate it. You tend to feel like you belong in that world if you play it for a certain amount of time. And that's why you have so much outrage.
Alliance is awful. We can't play Alliance. It helps with that realm pride concept, especially like. I think now I don't know. I haven't played really much in ages, so but it always felt like as the game went on, it kind of diluted some. But back in the day, the schism between Horde and Alliance was pretty strong, player-wise. Like the players, they were very much like.
At least
I don't play Alliance.
The first year or so when the game launches, which is basically the year I played, there was a real battle between Alliance and Horde that apparently got diluted when the game became just Yeah,
and one thing I wanted to add to that, because for me the story and the lore does come in and it is important in terms of the game's longevity, because attaching people to the game, certainly the game has to be fun. No amount of lore is going to help a game that's not fun. If the combat sucks, if the classes suck, if people don't enjoy playing it, they're not going to stay. But all things being equal, if the game is enjoyable and there's other games coming out that might be enjoyable, they're more likely, I think, to come back or to keep playing if they're also invested to some degree in the story and in the world, if the world feels kind of fleshed out and I would say when it comes to RPGs, we all like the world itself to feel more full, more involved. Like there's more stuff. It's more realistic. When you get into a game where the world's just kind of empty, and it becomes very quick and easy to see this game world is pretty empty. I mean, really. I was playing, not Black Desert. What was that other game? That other Korean game. No, recently. Maybe it was Black Desert. Yeah, it was Black Desert.
No, it was a
Bless,
yeah. See,
Bless. I played Bless for a little bit,
Yeah,
and in game there, and I was like, this pet taming system is awesome. I like it. It's really cool. But then I noticed that if I walk off the main storyline area and I just go to the forest like 5 minutes away, it's empty. There's not
there's
even
nothing.
monsters in there or animals to tame. It's just an empty forest. No critters, nothing. I was like, wow, this just completely fucked this game for me. Like I was walking around and they're just like, I mean, I'm still playing, but I kind of can't get over this. It really bugs me how empty this is. Y'all just did not even bother. So things like that can bother people, and when it comes to that longevity of the game, one thing that some people may disagree with me on, I don't know, but I've always held to, I think role players overall benefit the longevity of an MMO. One, they subscribe.
True.
If it's a subscription MMO anyway, they're subscribers, they're playing the game, even if they're not doing the PvP all the time, it's still a very consistent group that if you give them a very simple amount of tools and you give them some lore to play off of, they tend to come back and will play the game for ages, even if you don't update content.
Yeah, because they're and it's true for most MMOs, not the modern one because they lost that part of the MMO gaming, which is the community. Role players play as much for the game as for the community they play with. So that
Absolutely.
gives a game more longevity. And as long as you've got role players, you've got player base, which means other player might come back also. So
tying into the story as an end game and progressing content, there's also a measure, especially in PvP, of winning.
Yes.
And in games like World of Warcraft, you can look back at all their expansions, and they continually throw in story content where both factions are now teaming up to deal with the threat, because story-wise, neither faction can officially win. Players would be stuck on a faction story-wise that loses. They don't like that.
Yeah. No.
And in a realm v realm, in this case, it's going to be hard for anyone to officially win Camelot. I'm interested to see how they handle that on the larger scale, but players like to win, and there has to be some sort of evolving process to make them feel at least like they're contributing to a sense of winning.
And that they feel that the end goal is achievable.
Yeah, and
because
that is something
if you feel like there's no chance ever to actually conquer Camelot, there's a lot of players that are going to lose interest, because in the end they want to be the first ones to conquer Camelot.
And that is something we've kind of addressed in other episodes, where really looking at some of these things, it is difficult to see what is the lingering motivation for RvR, for PvP, besides just enjoying the fight. I do agree. I do tend to believe that if the game is enjoyable enough, ultimately victory doesn't matter, because the game's still fun. As long as the combat is fun, you can win individual battles, and that victory matters. It's just like it's like playing an FPS game. You're not winning the whole realm by winning a match.
No.
And you'll just play matches after matches after matches. But I do think that if they can find ways to push in-game storyline based on player actions, that can also help to be a sort of milestone for players to have some sort of persistence and some sort of impact and progress in the game. If they can go see ways that they're actually influencing the game world. That's a tougher sort of cookie to digest and figure out. But anyway, I think we've gone through quite a bit here. Come up with a few ideas. Chat's been very active, which I appreciate.
Yeah, it's nice for the first episode back. It's really nice. Yeah.
We will have episode 57 in 2 weeks at the same time, 6:30 PM EST or EDT or whatever the hell it is with the stupid daylight savings. I do not We don't know the topic yet. We have a nice topic list, and we're going to go through it and pick and decide what we want. Though we are open to new topic ideas. If people have things they really would like to see us talk about, or things that they have questions about, or whatever, you can post, send us some messages on Discord or the forums, or post comments in the videos. So I'm going to stop the recording, but we will catch everyone who's here live in 2 weeks, and anyone who's watching the videos on YouTube, we will catch, see your comments hopefully at the same time.